Hey there, Rednecks, Preppies, Redneck Preppies. It's me, the Redneck Preppy. How you doing today? Great? Good. So if there's one commonality among reloaders of all kinds, it's that everyone needs a way to pour powder. Most people start out with one of these. A manual or volumetric powder measure. There's nothing wrong with them at all. In fact, they have advantages like not needing power and are arguably the fastest way to throw individual powder loads. The con is that it's manual, so you're responsible for every throw of powder that it makes. That said, whether it's succumbing to gadgetitis or a desire for something they think is better, many people invest in an electronic powder measure like this Lyman Gen6, the subject of today's review. Now, the advantages to that unit are pretty clear. You can essentially automate one aspect of your powder throwing and do two things at once. The powder is throwing, and you can see bullets on completed cartridges while it's doing so. Now, let's see if the Gen 6 is worthy of the suggested retail price of US $329.99 or between $360 and $400, depending on where you look for those of us in Canada.
Before we get into using it, let's take a tour around the Gen 6 and see what you get for that money. Now, as you can see, it's a fairly compact system, which is good for those of us with a limited space. Lyman states that it does have electronic shielding to protect it from interference from things like cell phones, and it has anti-static and anti-drift technology baked in. They bill it as accurate to within 1/10 of a grain, and it dispenses 2 grains per second. The powder hopper doesn't hold quite a pound of smokeless, and I should state now, Lyman says this is only for smokeless powder, so don't use this for black powder. You have here your 50-gram check weight. You should be calibrating before each use, and a brush to assist in cleaning. Not seen in this image, it's a tool that you use to disassemble part of the machine during cleaning. Draft shield, pretty standard. Spout from which the powder magically comes out, and an ambidextrous powder pan. Now, here's one thing I really like. If you're familiar with other electronic powder measures, you've probably heard of the straw trick, where you modify a soda straw to help dispense extruded powders a little more accurately. Well, this little piece right here, called the restrictor plug, which screws into the spout, does the same thing. I can attest that it works, and you can remove it if you don't want to use it. Here we've got the touchscreen interface. Numbers to type in the load you want. On the left side, you have a button to stop pouring or clearing settings, an auto button to have the unit pour loads each time the powder pan is placed back on the scale, and yes, there is a scale built into the unit. Over on the right side, you have a mode button that cycles through the various measurements you can weigh with, grains, grams, that sort of thing. The on-off button, which surprisingly turns it on and off. And finally, the Cal 0 button to calibrate the unit or zero the scale. Finally, on the side is a port to empty the hopper of powder.
Okay, that out of the way, let's actually turn it on and use it. When you turn it on, okay, you'll immediately be greeted by this 3-minute countdown. This is to ensure that the unit is properly, or at least minimally, warmed up for use. You can interrupt it by pressing the stop button. That's obviously not advised, but useful if you unplug the unit for some reason and want to resume pouring powder while the unit is still warm. Now I'll cut back to when that timer is finished. Okay, we're back, and your first step is to calibrate the unit. So you want to remove the powder pan and this cap if it's on the spout, and you're going to zero the scale at this point by pressing the 0 cal button. Okay. Now press and hold the cal button until you see cal 50. Then you'll take your 50-gram check weight, put it on there, and press cal 0 again. Okay, so it has passed and it fails. If it fails, it will tell you. This is one of the annoyances I have about this unit. It doesn't say pass here. It says 0.0. If you're new to this unit, you might be initially confused. I don't know. I think it just should say pass. Okay, so next up, we'll put the cap back on temporarily, and the powder pan back on. And we're going to pour your preferred powder in the hopper. Today we're going to be using H4831, which is my preferred powder for 6.5 Swiss as our test. It's also an extruded powder, which the manual for this unit specifically mentions this unit can have some difficulty in metering accurately. And to use the restrictor plug, which we have installed in. Alright, powder in. Let's punch up a load. First we want a 0, of course, because we have the pan back on. Okay, so we're zeroed, we're ready to go. Now, we'll punch in the load. Let's say 43.5 grains, which just happens to be the load I use for 6.5 Swiss, and we hit enter. Oh, I think I waited a little too long before I hit enter there. There we go. Now, as you can see, it starts pouring reasonably quickly. And once it reaches a certain point, right around, 43 grains for this, it then trickles up. And you can see that it threw 43.6. So is it 43.6 or 43.5 plus or minus, or somewhere in between? So if you want to use the auto, you just press auto, and you see down here that auto has lit up. And then you can just type in your load. Whoops. 43.5. And it'll throw your load. Again, no change there. And you can see it is about 2 grains a second, so it's about 20 seconds. Well, there it actually threw. Well, now did it? So probably on the upper half of 43.5 to 43.6, and again on auto, it'll throw by itself. Okay, I know here many reviewers would be checking these loads against a balance scale. Dirty secret, I don't own one. Instead, we'll check the load against an electronic scale that I have off camera. It doesn't seem to want to play very well on this fabric that I've got covering my desk, so it's going to have to remain on camera. You're just going to have to trust me that I'm not lying to you. Anyway, let's start working. This is going to be a difficult test for the Gen 6 because I said Lyman specifically mentions a powder like H4831 as potentially throwing larger than requested loads, as you actually saw a couple minutes ago, right? Many electronic powder measures do have issues with extruded powders, hence the existence of that soda straw trick in the first place. Anyway, well, let's just do this. Alright, so we're going to do 43 grains. We're going to leave it on auto repeat because we're going to be testing a couple of different loads. And we'll find out how accurate at least the scale is for this unit. I am using an MTM electronic scale off camera. Wow, did you see that? 43.8, so it did throw a fairly heavy load, but let's see if the scale reports it as 43.8. 43.9. So this is probably reporting it accurately, but it is plus or minus within 1/10 of a grain, and it's probably on the higher end of the 43.8. However, not a good auspicious start for the 4831 powder in this. I do use this in throwing 4831, and I'll be honest with you, a fair number of my loads do end up back in the hopper. But I mean, once it gets going, it tends to do reasonably well. Oh, there you go. See if it just stopped. Alright, so it was 43.6 and we have 43.6. Okay, so the scale was accurate there. And we'll give it another shot. We'll give it another 2 loads just to make sure. .7, and it'll show you that it was supposed to throw 43.5, but it actually is 43.7. We'll just lift up and see. Yep, 43.7. On the scale, it shows as 43.7. Okay, so the electronic scale at least is working well with on the Gen 6, if not the powder thrower. And this will be the last one we check. I mean, as you can see, the Gen 6 scale is at least accurate and reasonably consistent. In the roster of powders I use, H4831 is typically the most troublesome for throwers in general, but particularly this one apparently. So 43.6. Yeah, 43.6. So the scale is right, even if the machine is having difficulty. You know, I get good, consistent results throwing powders like BLC2, Varget, which is also an extruded powder, but it does much better in this machine than 4831, W231, H4198, IMR 4198, and all of the other powders that I've run through it, whether they're ball, flake, or extruded. So this does do a pretty good job with powders, but as the manual says, when it comes to powders like H4831, man, it is this machine's Achilles heel. However, don't let this dissuade you, because like I said, I worst case this so that you could see exactly what it was like. With all the other powders I use, it's actually pretty good. Just 4831, man, it does not like that powder. Okay, now that we've poured our powder, I'll show you the cleaning process, and it's fairly simple. First thing you want to do after turning off the power, unplugging the unit and putting this cap back on the spout, is to empty the powder from the hopper, and you can simply do that by opening up this port. Now you see this little gate here? Do not lift this up until you have your powder can below it. Now usually I just do this over the desk, but because of the camera angle here, that's not going to work. So I'm just going to do it like that. Drop a couple of grains. In this day and age, that is horrible. And you can see it empties fairly quickly. I want to give it a little tap just to get a little bit more out. Obviously, cleaning extruded powders is easier than cleaning ball, and whoa, there's more in there. Good Lord. Alright, close the gate. Now, take the brush and you can sweep out any powder that's remaining in the hopper. Most of it should be gone at this point. Look at that. Powder on my desk. What I do for you guys. Okay. Now you can remove the hopper because all the powder is gone from there. Okay. Now using this tool, the one that I showed you the picture of earlier, we're going to remove the spout. And if you turn this slightly, you're going to see a hole right here. And you just stick the tool in there, and this is the only reason you need this tool. And you turn away from you, and this removes the spout. Now you want to be careful removing this, or otherwise you'll end up with, you know, powder coming out. No reason for that. And you can empty that into the powder container. Boom, that's done. If you had any powder here, you can obviously clean that up. Next up is you press this part right here and this entire unit slides out. And this is where you can do the final emptying of powder. And boom, you've cleaned it. Now, you're going to want to pay particular attention to these areas here, because powder can get caught in them, especially ball powder, I find. So you might want to, make sure that you brush those areas out. I use one of these brushes. I don't use the one that came with it. I find a taller brush actually does a better job. So you just give those areas a little bit of a wipe, and boom, Bob's your uncle. That's about it. Pretty easy. Just go in reverse to reassemble everything. Your first time cleaning is probably going to be a little bit clumsy, just because you're getting used to it. But honestly, there's only a few steps that you need to do. It's not hard to completely remove all traces of powder you were throwing, so that when you switch to another powder, you're starting fresh and uncontaminated. Okay, it's pros and cons time. It's a review. You have to have some of both, right? First, time for the pros. I find the unit to be easy to clean, which is important when you're switching powders. I don't know if it's the easiest powder measure to clean, but I find the Gen 6 to be a quick job. If I was going to offer one slight criticism, it's that you need the included tool to remove the spout. I'm surprised they didn't engineer a way to take that spout off without a tool. Outside of that, if you can't properly clean this thing, you aren't trying. I like that it comes with a restrictor plug for troublesome extruded powders. I find it to be a more reliable method than the soda straw modification popular among people who use electronic powder measures. In fact, I even use it with some ball powders that I find overshoot the mark more often than I like. In terms of accuracy, I find it to be no worse than any other consumer-grade electronic powder measure, and certainly more consistently accurate than some I've owned in the past. Like every thrower, there is a margin of error when you're pouring powder, and most of them are about 1/10 of a grain. So in terms of accuracy, the Gen 6 does live up to its billing. You didn't see them, but it also comes with a number of add-ons that allow you to plug this into different outlets around the world. Not something to those of us in North America, but useful to those of you in other parts of the world. So nice touch by Lyman. It might not be a consideration for some people, but the fact that it has a fairly small footprint is a boon to those of us, not blessed with an acre of space on our reloading bench. There are throwers out there that are twice the size and do exactly the same job. Finally, the touch screen is fairly responsive. The on-off button seems to not register touches as easily as all the other ones. Perhaps that's a built-in feature so you don't accidentally turn it off while using it. But outside of that, I've had no issues whatsoever with the screen. Okay, now the cons. And some of them might be a bit nitpicky, but it's my review, so tough. I do find that the Gen 6 can be finicky with some powders like H335 and H4831. With the latter, it's understandable since a lot of throwers tend to throw extruded powders less capably. But H335 is a ball powder, and I find that it overthrows more often than other ball powders I use. The restrictor plug does solve the issue, but my experience is that the Gen 6 can have issues with ball powder as well. That said, most powders work just fine. Now, this might actually be a plus to some, but I do find that the Gen 6 often throws 1/10 of a grain low. Kinda. Lyman says that the Gen 6 has a plus or minus of 1/10 of a grain, and I found that the unit enforces that margin with a vengeance. If, for example, I put in a desired charge of 21.5 grains of a powder, it can throw to 21.4 and just declare a 21.5. Technically, the unit is doing what it's supposed to. Throw a charge to 21.5 plus or minus 1/10 of a grain. And it's in its defense, oftentimes those 21.4 grain throws are actually a weight between 21.4 and 21.5. Still, for those of us who want what we want when we want it, it can be annoying. That said, it's a plus, because I've talked to people who like the Gen 6 for precisely this reason. For those who like to throw a charge and then trickle up to the exact weight that they want. So for you, it might be a plus. For others, it might be a minus. I put it under cons just because 21.5 is 21.5. I'm also surprised at the lack of programmability or hackability. A lot of electronic throwers have hidden menus where you can adjust throw speed or when it starts to trickle, things like that. The Gen 6 has none of that. You get what you get and there's no way of changing anything. Kind of disappointing in this day and age. I would love to, for example, to extend the fast pour time and reduce the trickle time at the end. I was able to do that with another electronic thrower I had, but not this one. I'm also surprised by the lack of manual trickling. The unit itself trickles up to a charge, so it's capable of trickling. Why not give me a button where I can trickle powder as well? My last electronic powder measure had that function. Why not the Gen 6? This one is going to be nitpicky, but the lack of circular or bullseye level, spirit bubble, whatever you want to call it, is odd. Lyman wants you to use the Gen 6 on a firm and level surface, but the unit doesn't have any way to tell you how level it is. You can buy spirit bubbles in bulk for a few cents and put them on the unit. Hell, you can do this yourself as the end user and not even raise your cost at all. For something that costs over $300, kind of annoying. So those are my thoughts about the Lyman Gen 6. Would I recommend its purchase? Yes. I've never been tempted to get rid of it, and believe me, when reloading gear annoys me, it disappears without remorse. My last electronic powder measure discovered that. I also have a volumetric powder measure that I don't hate either, the one that you saw earlier. When it comes time to reload though, I always grab the Gen 6. It gives me accurate results to within its specifications, it does so consistently, and allows me to do other things while it's pouring powder. So, promoting efficiency. Is an electronic powder measure essential? Absolutely not. The Lee Perfect powder measure that you saw at the beginning, which cost a grand total of, I think, $30 American, will do a fine job pouring powder all day, every day. Even pricey volumetric powder measures generally come in at less than what a good electronic powder measure costs. That said, reloading is oftentimes not the province of rational analysis and financial sobriety. So if you want to treat yourself and upgrade one aspect of your reloading process, an electronic powder measure isn't the worst thing you can buy. In that regards, the Gen 6 isn't essential, but it's nice to have as well. And if you're a real baller, you can buy and run two of the things at the same time and just pound out ammunition. At any rate, I hope you found today's review to be vaguely entertaining and somewhat informative. As always, I hope your reloading goes well and gives you ever tighter groups. Take care, and bye-bye.